Thanks so much for joining us. I'm very excited that we have our first panel discussion today. And so this format was the Photography Salon before by the Motel Collection, which is a gallery collaboration by Kalman, Brighton at Motel. And as I said, today we have our first panel discussion with Adriana, Max and Maroussia. Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm just gonna, so this, the idea for that format derived from our last Photography Salon where Maroussia, where I was talking to Max, and Maroussia and Adriana asked some very interesting questions. Before we move on, I just quickly want to introduce each one of you. And I'm going to start with Adriana. Adriana Monsalve is an artist, cultural worker, and collaborative publisher working in the photo book medium. Within her photographic practice, Monsalve is a storyteller and visual communicator who produces in-depth stories on identity through the nuances in between race, gender, and immigrant-adjacent experiences. Along with Katerina Rack, Monsalve is co-founder of Homey House Press, a radical cooperative platform that challenges the ever-changing forms of storytelling with image and text. And next up is Maroussia. Maroussia is a documentary photographer based between London and Dakar. Maroussia is she sees Africa as a continent of inspiring, multiple, and sometimes overlaying facets, and her photography tries to reflect that. Her photographs try to show the human portraying and communicating the moments that reveal the social, political, and economic environment of this extraordinary continent. Key to her work is moving away from misrepresentation and problematic stereotypes, pervading photographs that can shape values, expectations, and mindsets both within Africa and from the West. And Max Houghton is, she's the course leader of MA Photojournalism and Documentary Photography at London College of Communication. She's a writer, editor, and curator working with the photographic image as it intersects with politics, law, and human rights. She's internationally published, and she's the co-author of Firecracker, Female Photographers Now, together with Fiona Rogers. And together with David Birkin, she founded the research collective Visible Justice, a transdisciplinary research collective working at the intersection of visual culture and social justice. Yeah, sorry, that was a bit. Yeah, so welcome. Thanks so much for being here today, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much. Thanks for hosting us, Vera. Really appreciate it. As Vera said, this conversation has completely grown out of the last one where Vera was kind enough to host me talking about developments in 21st century photography. And that had an emphasis on race, racialized pictures, and kind of what we can do to decolonize photography, I suppose. And there were two brilliant questions that arose and that we'll actually get to later on that Vera will remind us of. But from these two brilliant women that everyone's just been introduced to, who I was lucky enough to have as my students, Maroussia very recently at LCC, and Adriana quite a while ago at the University of Westminster. I'm not sure, maybe 7 years ago or something. And so it's so nice for me to learn from my former students, which obviously I learn from my current students as well, but for that process to continue always is really special. And so out of these questions, we've obviously had a pre-chat, so we didn't surprise you too much. But we realised that in essence, we're trying to talk about two things, and they're two really big things. So we won't get through all of it, but we want to talk about visual representations, mainly by photojournalism in the first instance, of the African continent. One very big thing, and visual representations of Black and brown people in the US. And UK in the West, I suppose. And in both cases, we want to try to uncover strategies against racialized imagery. And maybe as this conversation flows, we'll find other ways in which these two subjects interconnect. And I think one thing that's arisen is kind of maybe some of the tensions involved in diasporic representation. So yeah, as you will have noticed, we decided to call this iteration of the talk Fronteras. This term is completely known to me only because of Adriana, and so I'd like to ask you, Adriana, please, to tell us what that term means to you and how you use it in your work, and why therefore we all chose it as a title for today.
Sure. Hello, everyone. So basically, Fronteras, it's Spanish for border, and we decided to use this word and adopt it for the entire chat for today, because it's basically an ethos that comes from Homey House Press that we've kind of been investigating for a couple of years. We talk about fronteras as they relate to like the land, yeah, the actual borders on the land, but we kind of use them in a myriad of ways, and we celebrate all the nuances around them to really talk about fronteras all over the place, fronteras on our bodies, how we really look at this as like photography as like a bridge to so many different other places. And really the way we're using photography as journalists, as art, as fine art, as all these different things, like fronteras, borders, this ends up being like a really good way to connect all the ways we can talk about photography, even though we're sharing them in such different ways.
Fantastic, so eloquent. Thank you so much. And yeah, I think that the idea of Fronteras, for me, taking on from Adriana's idea, this space that photography potentially brings us in all those different versions of it. You know, everything is an image, and the image is so important. I mean, obviously I'm being literal here, but it's how we see things, and it's how we understand things in culture. The image does a lot of work in our world. And you know, we're sitting here under this umbrella of hope it's not raining, of documentary photography, but that's a very wide, you know, in its widest definition. And I think that we're really talking about how photography makes communities, and unmakes communities too. But hopefully we can talk mostly about making them through kind of acts of seeing together. But also through collaboration, which Adriana, in particular, her work has been about that in very specific ways. Maroussia's has too, in a different understanding of collaboration, or a different version of collaboration, and also things like listening. You know, it's really interesting, and I know Maroussia will talk about this, but how seeing leads to, or can lead to, listening, and then go on to take further forms like theatre, perhaps, and music. So it's as though this making this visible, this image is only the very beginning. So I would really like, Maroussia, if you would, we're going to have presentations about 6 minutes from both Maroussia and Adriana. And Maroussia, would you like to take centre stage, please?
So hi everyone, thank you Max for the introduction, Adriana and Vera. So basically I have a journey. I want to just quickly talk a little bit about my journey to photography. So I think photography was always a passion, but never means to an end. So one of the main things that I learned in my course was to try and identify what I wanted to do as a documentary photographer, and how I wanted my photography to be able to convey my aspirations in life, or well, what I wanted to achieve, which was mainly grew from my experiences living in Africa. I mean, I grew up mostly in London, but my whole working life and, you know, my multiculturalism have made me see many different places in the world, particularly in Africa. And I've always been shocked between the reality of the rawness of the continent. I mean, for me, it's a continent of inspiration, because it shows the folly of humanity in all its forms. So, you know, the alarming, the peculiar, the humoristic, the loving, the terrifying, the violence, all those things. But I always found that the representations that I was seeing of my continent, and I'm talking about a continent here because we see 64 countries, but my representation of what I saw was completely different to what was being seen, or at least what I perceived in the Western media. So one of the subjects that, well, one of the things I'm going to share with you is my major project, which I did for LCC, which is about infanticide in Senegal. Before I delve into the topic, it was actually for me quite a journey because it made me realize how much where you grow up or how much things can have, the media can shape your mind. So I went into Senegal wanting to make a documentary about abortion, because in the media the link between abortion and infanticide was made. But actually getting there and doing my research, speaking to experts and women that had committed infanticide, I found there was absolutely no link between access to abortion and infanticide. So I'll go now into the subject so you'll understand more, but that sort of raised a lot of ethics and a lot of questions for me. So questions of representation, as I said, questions also of the ability, if I had not been from Senegal, would I have been able to sense those sensibilities and see all the different layers that involves, you know, how tradition or the loss of tradition and the role of women in society has been changing and how that has impacted everything. So I'm sure I'm running quite late. So I'll show you a few pictures from okay, so basically, first of all, infanticide is the killing of a newborn baby. It's the second most common cause of incarceration. Can you guys see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet.
No. It's up on mine. Sorry. Sorry about this. Can you guys see my screen now?
It says that you started screen sharing, but don't see. I mean, I'm not sure how it is for Max or Adriana.
It's a black screen, but we can't. It says that it's sharing. But...
There, actually try with the picture I've sent you.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I'll go on in the meantime. So infanticide is the killing of a newborn baby. It's the second most common cause of incarceration of women in Senegal after drug trafficking. Closely linked to the collective notion of shame and done perpetrated are mostly by women in isolation. It's a response mostly to taboo pregnancies and the ensuing immense pressures and stigma and ostracization brought on by society. So today, Senegal is facing a cultural crisis. So examining how loss, yeah, so you'd have to, no, if you go to the first one with the beds, that should be
That's the first one.
no, that's the last ones.
Oh.
Be WSK1 or WSK2.
Oh, okay, sorry. I thought.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
Actually this documentary led me to realize that Senegal was facing a cultural crisis, and examining how the loss of tradition, the rise of religious conservatism combined with economic hardship, lack of access to contraception, education and isolation has unfortunately created an environment where women, through fear of shame and humiliation, have decided to have actually been able to even see infanticide as a choice. So the project takes a look at Senegal's growing alarming rates and its root causes embedded by, you know, a very complex and multi-layered society. So the images that Vera is actually showing, the one that you're actually seeing right now is about tradition and the role of women in Senegalese society. Women, even though it's a patriarchal society name, it's actually very matriarchal. And through loss of tradition, so this woman is a Badian. The Badian are the aunts, they're the elder sisters, the eldest brothers, because we're a Muslim country where men can have up to 5 wives. So and she would be the one to pass on the tradition. So they would go into what is called the sacred woods for up to 3 months. That's both boys and girls separately. And in this ancestral tradition, the Rajan would teach those women, obviously the contents remain secret, but teach them sexuality, menstrual cycles, and traditional medicine, which would allow them to have access to some methods of contraception. This having been removed is a major source of problems, because women no longer have access to or control over their bodies. You can, yeah, move on, Vera, please, to the next pictures. So just to show, these are just to show basically, you can just scroll through them and I'll just keep talking about, yeah. So, I mean, in the first 5 months of last year, there was actually 77 bodies and babies that were found. Traumatic as this may be, it's a tiny, it's you know, a tiny iceberg on the iceberg of what the actual reality of is going on. This picture actually is very telling, because you're looking at a picture of Bussus, which is one of the second biggest landfill in Africa. So this is where, because the bodies are getting rid of mostly through septic tanks or disposal vans, they end up in these landfills, and children are the first ones in line to actually find infant bodies. And at the moment, what you can see is a young boy who found litter on the wasteland, who had decided to put it on his face, and with his friends actually sorting through eggs to find live chicks. And I thought that that was, you know, showing the resilience of youth, and actually a very tragic parallel between life and death. You'll go on to see pictures of women that have shared their stories with me, which often says the same thing. I mean, these are women that got pregnant. A lot of them are actual victims of rape. Some of them were actually, the youngest victim that I spoke to has been incarcerated since the age of 11. I mean, in anyone's sense, anyone that's pregnant at 11 did not come out of choice. But I mean, we can have a talk about this project more in depth, but what the main lesson for me in this, working through this project, was why was it so important for me, and what came out of it. So what was so important to me is the realization that you know, our loss of culture, tradition, religious extremism, and all the other things I spoke about were having a really deep impact on our society. And this is something that needs to be discussed. I mean, it's completely taboo, but yet it's the second cause of incarceration of women. So how do you create a dialogue? I came in with a very Western aesthetics of imagery, and I realized that this, if I wanted to make a difference, the image solely, or taking and you know, these women's stories out there, needed another medium. So this is what Max was talking about earlier. So for me, I realized that I need to develop a new visual language, and that would mean simply going out to doing it the way, you know, for Senegal at least, the way things are done. So going out there, creating theatre, live music, having psychologists, so actually transitioning from being just a photographer to what actually Max said was becoming much more active in my practice. And this led me to the question about, you know, self-representation in modern photo documentary or photojournalism, and how do you best adapt it? I'm coming from an African perspective, so my main question is more about you know, how, if you're not taking Western aesthetics, how I can use photography as a means for change, and then developing that visual language which actually people can understand and you know, develop. So yeah, I think I'm probably well enough for there, but thank you for being patient.
Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Maroussia. Yeah, really important and difficult subject. Thanks for sharing that with everyone. Although without a gap, we will obviously go back to discuss it, but to talk about Adriana's work, her own photographic practice, and of her work with Homey House Press. Adriana, thank you.
Yeah, sure. yeah, thanks y'all for coming and thanks for being with us today. I'm gonna share with y'all a little bit about how I started as a photographer and how this has been the avenue to create community in so many different ways, and how from where I started from picking up a camera like 12 years ago, the first time I picked up a camera, to then what Max changed in me, and then to where I am today. I'm gonna share the screen, hopefully it works. Let's see. Is it working?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. So my work is very much, as a photographer, is very much all around identity. I am someone that, because of the intersection of people that I am, because of being, oh yeah, okay, it's working. Because of being a queer femme, a Latinx femme, there's all kinds of intersections that come together within this body. And because of that, I've become very obsessed with identity politics. And it's been something that I excavate in so many different ways, and photography has been the catalyst for me to do that in really healing ways for myself. My work has been personal and started with personal in a really strong way. Like I am very committed to doing personal projects that are like healing for myself first, and then that connect to political things second or last sometimes even. But yeah, so the first project that I did in this way that I did for my master's when Max was my teacher at University of Westminster was Clear as Black. It was a project that I was excavating, yeah, basically the outer layer, like the skin that I'm in, and looking at how, as someone that is Latinx and that isn't a race, that we're like an ethnicity, we're an amalgamation of people, we're an amalgamation of so many different identities, and how I have always been racialized my entire life, how people have always told me I'm not this enough and I'm not that enough and I don't fit into this label of Latinx. And it's true. I mean, like, being Latinx shouldn't be able to fit into anything, because we do have the enslaved, we do have the colonizer, and we do have the indigenous living inside this body. So they have to make peace every single day. And to talk about it as a race, it just came a point that where I was just like, this doesn't make sense anymore. I need to excavate this and investigate it for myself. And I was given the opportunity to do that with Max when I did my master's. And so Clear as Black was the first avenue where I did that. And it's a project that starts in Puerto Rico, and is still an ongoing project, but this is just the first chapter. And I was using a rare type of albinism found on the island of Puerto Rico, and connecting it to different parallels with Latinidad, and really challenging ideas of challenging ideas of representation, challenging ideas of what Latinx is, and challenging ideas of what albinism is. And that led me to I used to live here, which was like this very, a really sensitive project that I was very insecure about. I mean, I think all these projects I was super insecure about because they are personal, so they start with me. And it was something that I was doing to decolonize religion. It was something that as growing up as a Seventh-day Adventist my entire life, I was starting to get to the point where I just didn't fit in these spaces anymore, and I wanted to understand spirituality for myself. And in doing that, in investigating the church that I grew up in, I ended up exploring so much more about space, about actual spaces we take up, and it led so much to a project about gentrification, and talking about gentrification from a spiritual sense, and there's all kinds of connections coming together. And during this time is when Homie House Press was born. Homie House Press is an independent publishing house that I am so thrilled and lucky to be able to be creating with my partner and work wife, Caterina Rag. And so we started making this publishing house where we didn't really know what we were doing, but this was the first book we made. And from there, I was able to investigate another part of my identity that I was like really trying to wrestle with and like be honest about which was talking about me as a queer identity, and really exploring that in nuanced ways. So I was living on the border of Texas and Mexico, in Laredo, Texas, in South Texas, for 2 years. And during that time, I was able to, I guess, just really look at the ways that mainstream media talks about that with the ways that I see borders, and I see borders as the resurgence. Like when two things come together, something new happens. It's not the end, and in a lot of ways it's not the beginning, it's just the juncture, it's the union, it's duality, it's multiplicity. Borders are so queer, and it's so beautiful and so exciting. So I wanted to basically, with FEMME Frontera, I made my own utopic version of how I see the border, and how and the border that, yeah, a lot of people in Latinx ethnicity and otherwise cross through. The border that was closest to me also. And from there, we've made a book with it as well called FEMME Frontera. And from there, me and Kate realized that, like, whoa, like the way we're using photography, the way that we are allowing ourselves to take up space with photography is really different. And we decided yeah, this is a thing. Homie House is a thing. It's happening. It's a publishing house, and we're gonna lean into it. And this is what you see in front of you right now is the 3-part Femifesto that basically shows on the back of some of them and on the fronts of others, there's like basically the 3 pillars that make up what Homie House does in the photo world, in the art world, and how we set ourselves apart within DIY publishing and within photography. I'll just go through them really quickly right now. So this transfronteriza life, transfronteriza literally means border crosser. So we're talking about in-between spaces, which I've already talked about in so many ways, like it's me. And then there's the personal, political, and poetic. Personal, political, and poetic is how we have chosen to make photography, in that as photojournalists and as documentary photographers, the personal is always first for us. And we're going against the grain in that the political is supposed to be first for photojournalism. But we feel like the work of Homie House is very much rooted in abolition. And abolition is something that it's not just, it can't just be in one part of your life. It's something that you do every day, and in everything that you do, in all of your actions. So for me, it always has to be personal first, and then the political comes second. And the poetic is just us being able to play with colors and design and poetry and put it all together in a really fun way that is very Homie House Press. And now 3.5 years later, since me and Kate started Homie House Press, to the left is our canon as of 2019, so it's missing a couple publications. And to the right is me and Kate, and we're also sitting with the canon in front of us there as well, and the Femifesto behind me. And yeah, so we've been able to grow in a way where we've made this platform where, yeah, it started with me sharing my stories, but it's now become a place where we invite so many people to collaborate with us and talk about their journeys, their experience in an honest way. And so to the left is Even the Score, which is a newspaper that we made with students from an HBCU, a historically Black college and university here in Maryland, that we wanted to give them the space to talk about the vote for this year, which in the USA is like a really big deal, maybe the most important like vote ever. So we wanted to give them the space to talk about why is voting important for Black and Brown communities in the USA in the year 2020. And it just became a really interesting space where the youth were just like really speaking truth to power and making such beautiful things and able to hold like really, really interesting and courageous conversations. And the photography was just like really, really beautiful to us as well. Home in the Other is a workshop that we do with all kinds of people. It's a workshop that we do like multiple times where we really decolonize the word other, where in photojournalism, we otherize people all the time. We don't even realize we're doing it. It's just something we naturally do. So it's a project all about really taking that word apart and questioning who is the other, what is the other. And another example of something we do is to the left is Knox Rocks, which is a really gorgeous project, our one and only children's book that we made, that we worked with Jennifer White Johnson and her husband Kevin Johnson and their son Knox, who is a 7-year-old Puerto Rican kid on the spectrum of autism. And they made a space for themselves to celebrate neurodiversity and really talk about mental health, talk about neurodiversity in different ways, which we all know in communities in general, like talking about mental health is taboo. much more sensitive. And yeah, and this is a piece of from our manifesto, and y'all can take a screenshot and read it later. But yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Adriana. Really appreciate both of your presentations. Fantastic. So before we delve into the questions that you each asked, which will bring us back in very important senses to your work, I just wanted to talk a little bit about language, because in our pre-discussions for this panel, it became apparent that we use different words between just us here on this panel, and it became clear to me in a way that it hadn't before, that a term like people of colour, which is a term that I'm using, makes really very little sense in, say, the continent of Africa, you know, in Senegal, who's a person of colour. And so we had a really interesting discussion that I just hope we could reprise briefly here before we go to all the other kinds of questions that we want to talk with each other about, but just to discuss the language that we use when talking about race and the reasons behind it, so that we can, yeah, establish the ways in which we agree, disagree, and just understand each other. I don't know who'd like to go first. Yeah, as I say, the term I've been using is people of colour, and I'm aware we talked a little bit about the term BIPOC, which obviously brings in the indigenous human, which I do want to do. But me personally, I mean, I'm a white anti-racist person, is perhaps the best way to describe me, and I feel uncomfortable calling any other person an acronym, but I think that the acronym is really fantastic. So that's me. You guys.
Well, I can go.
Sure.
Yeah, I think we. Oh, there.
Oh.
Okay. So I feel most comfortable using the terms Black and brown folks. I use folks because FOLX, spelled folks in that way, is really inclusive of queer identities. And when we're talking about Black and brown, I guess it can be more nuanced as well. So although I don't have a specific reason for not using people of color, I like Black and brown folks better, and I feel, I guess, more represented in it as well.
Sorry, I missed a bit of what you said. I got cut out there. And we had in the pre-discussion, yeah, these are also things that made me reflect on my own perceptions of things. I mean, I grew up perhaps naively, but never considering color. I think perhaps because of my multicultural background, but I really come from a background where I believe that race is a construction. I'm a humanist, so for me, I mean, there's no race. We're all humans. It's our emotions that connect us. Even though, you know, humanity is made up of particularisms, but they're universal. So, I mean, I've been reading a book about from Nell Ovin Painter, who's a Princeton historian, and she's been studying race. And I've got a quote for her. She says that ever since Enlightenment, race theory and its inevitable partner, racism, constructed by dominant people to justify their dominance on others. And for me, as soon as I start to think in terms of race, or even trying to define it, it's defining people and thus putting people in boxes. So, I mean, obviously, I have been subject to people's perceptions of me in that sense. So people seeing me, asking me, you know, where are you from? Or in Senegal, you know, calling me perhaps white because of I'm much less, you know, dark than others, or in France being called, you know, a black person, but that's not something that I feel inside. I don't feel I'm black, I don't feel I'm white. And that's something that I think is really important in terms of the African continent, first of all, because it's been mingled as one country. It's not one country. It's not, you know, we have different ethnic backgrounds. We have, you know, before the revealed religions, you know, we have one common factor. It's most most people were animists, and that's what founded. Race is not something, even religion, well, even though it's becoming now, you know, in the last 20 to 50 years, something that's much more important. I don't think that it's something that's as problematic as it's being portrayed, or as it's being seen in the West, or experienced actually in the West or in the US, you know, with the Black Lives Matter. We spoke about this a little bit with Max and Adriana during our pre-discussions. But for me, it's very important in my photography and in my work that humanity is what prevails. I mean, I really think that for me, even debating about race is actually, it's completely different to racialization. I think there is racialization, but I don't think there's issues of race. And I think that once you start to use race, whatever the definition you might give it, you're actually starting to exclude people rather than include people. And I think that's very problematic for me. I mean, and if you look at the first Declaration of Human Rights, it doesn't come from France, it actually comes from the Mandan Empire in 1222. And it does state actually that there is no such thing, you know, everyone has the same worth. There is not one person that is, whether they're older or younger, smarter or less, we all have the same worth, we all have the same blood. And I think that's really, really fundamental in my photography, but perhaps because I'm from the other side and I've seen the damage that actually, you know, creating these differences, creating those actual fronteras in Africa, which did not exist before, has created, you know, those parallels that are actually two different conflicts. You know, the conflicts that we might be experiencing are completely different, be it that they are the results of colonization, slavery. I mean, that's not what I want to focus on, but these are not questions that are within, they brought up from the outside. And I think that's really important also to talk about. So for me, I really want to hear more about your point of view, Adriana, on that, because, you know, in America, the civil rights movement has been, you know, so important, and it has been something which, you know, America, like South Africa, has really had segregation and divide, which still has, you know, social, economic consequences today. And obviously, with everything that's going around, we can see that things haven't moved that far off, even though there's been an Obama. So, you know, my question goes back to you. How do you feel that racialization of the issue of the word of race is actually impeding or actually helping in perhaps in your cause, and moving forward past those stereotypes and past, you know, all of that negativity that's often linked to the idea of race, because race obviously puts one above the other, with a dominant and oppressed and oppressed. Yeah, sorry. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, we definitely, race is an institution itself that was invented. Like, race isn't real, right? But in the case of the US, I do feel that it is a way, because we can't have the utopic society we want, and we can't be, right, we're not past, at least, like, yeah, definitely in the US, we're not past race at all. So because of that, it is a way to rally around the idea that when we say Black Lives Matter, we're really talking about when the most oppressed life matters, then everyone else's does too. Because, yeah, when you're talking about Blackness in itself as well, Blackness in the USA, there's so much beyond that. Right now, who's visible in Black Lives Matter is Black men being murdered by police. This is why this started. But there's also so much other things that are rallying around the idea of Black Lives Matter. And it's women that are leading this movement, honestly. And when we look at this, like, there's so many things within that, in that the Black man, and like what would be like seen as the most oppressed for me would be the Black trans femme, and the trans femme, and how there's so much killings of them, and so many killings just since George Floyd of just Black trans femmes, and how most of that is done by Black just like levels and levels to how like, yeah, it separates communities, but it also makes it able to rally around things. And it's definitely by no means like the best way to do it. But I think like these are all, yeah, ways to move forward. And yeah, that's where I'm at with it.
Yeah, thank you. I wonder if we could go to the questions that you each asked. I think in terms of, you know, I think by the language we use, however we use it, we're trying not to do harm, we're trying not to do violence, and we're trying to take the conversation forward. And I think, Vera, was it Adriana's question was about how we can kind of dismantle the harm? So we're going back to photography now. Do you have it there, please? If you don't, I can.
Yeah. Given the challenges and sensitivities to discussions about race and inequality, how can we best introduce this topic in ways that are dismantling the harms historically caused by photography? How are you doing this in a manner that is constructive, meaningful, and safe?
So yeah, thanks, Vera. So Adriana asked that question of me in the original talk, and I just thought it was a great question, as we will with Maroussia's question soon, to bring back to all of us. And so I understood the idea of the harms historically caused as being, you know, the categorization that Maroussia was speaking about, when you kind of separate people and say you're that type of person, and, you know, forms of control that photography has been historically used for by whiteness, by power, etc. So that's what I understood as the harms. And yeah, so what do you understand as the harms, Adriana, because you asked the question in the first place?
Yeah, I guess the harms would be a lot with having to do, well, there's so many levels to it, but specifically when I was saying to you was in the classroom, like how do we do like restorative justice with when we're teaching documentary photography in the classroom. But yeah, I mean, how do we dismantle like these traditional systems of who gets to take the pictures, of who gets to do all these things? I mean, it's all connected to it.
Absolutely. And Maroussia, before I ask you about harms, I just want to respond on the classroom situation. Obviously, I've been thinking a lot about that, and you know, I've been reading articles about lecturers showing a classroom full of people, for example, a photograph of a lynching. And, you know, I really had to think, have I ever done that? Because, you know, politically it's super important that, you know, that subject is, well, that it never happens again, etc. I know that I haven't done, but I feel like I could have been this close, and the trauma that I would have caused if I had have done that to somebody whose family had actually received that in their body. So, you know, extra thinking, even when you think that you always think that, extra think and think again. And we had a really interesting session at LCC with some of our brilliant colleagues on culture jamming, and they were bringing in imagery. A lot of it was from newspapers, for example, and just getting each of us, and some of them had already done it, but to jam that culture, that kind of stereotypical image, with something else, literally putting something else on top of it, changing the words, changing the kind of how the image was anchored, you know, some kind of hate speech from the Daily Mail, but not even just that. You know, it could have been an example like really recently when the Guardian used the wrong picture of the rapper who was racist. You know, they use a picture of a different black rapper, and it was only up for a certain amount of time, you know, until like I think it was up for 3 hours before someone realised, which is obviously, you know, not great. It was sorry, I had to look it up because I'm not all that great on rappers, but it was Wiley who made the anti-Semitic comments, and it was Kano that they put up the image of. Yeah, so that happened. But anyway, so culture jamming is something I haven't done with my students in particular, and I think could potentially be really interesting. Like, what do we expect this image to be doing? And again, that idea of active images. So that's something. Maroussia, what harms do you feel that photography has does cause?
I mean, that's a very long, big question.
Yep.
I think a lot to do, from my perspective, is about what's visible, I mean, we did, and what I would call it visual justice, I mean, and visual injustice that has been caused on the continent. And a lot of it is about the legacy of own history and representation and perceived representation. And again, I hate doing this because I hate talking about the continent as a one thing. So I'll focus more on West and East Africa, which I know. But I mean, I think it's really important when we're talking about photojournalism, documentary photography. I think in essence, the next generations are the ones that are going to have to take this up. I mean, we're starting, I think the debate is already way too late because they're advanced everywhere. People are taking, I mean, I see in Africa, everyone's taking, in Senegal, everyone's taking ownership of their own, how do I say, of their own stories, and their own perceptions and realities and truths, and they're doing that with phones, and the sort of imagery that is coming out is completely different. So I think, again, I mean, the more diverse, the better. I found that in both years, because I retook twice LCC, minority, even though, I mean, there was so many different ways into which you can consider a minority of opinions, or a minority of even of countries of origin. And I think that's very, very, very sad for the future of photography as well, and particularly documentary photography. So I think, you know, that's where things should start. Obviously, not everyone is lucky enough to be able and have Max as a as a lecturer in one of our courses, but even just, you know, what Adriana was saying, you know, how it all works, who chooses, who decides what represents what, and why is your perception of my reality, you know, how do you justify all of that? And, you know, a lot of collaboration, I think, working in collaboration with a lot of different artists and photographers is a way of bridging that gap also.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I see photojournalism as an extension of colonialist practices. And I always did, even before I had the language for it. You know, as soon as I started looking at this imagery, I was thinking, you know, luckily what I wasn't thinking was, oh, is everyone mentally ill in Africa then? Because that's the imagery I was seeing. But, you know, anyway, so yeah, there's a lot of undoing. And I think some of us were just, Vera and I anyway, were listening to a talk earlier with Mark Seeley and others about decolonizing the lens, and this word work keeps coming back. We all have to do the work, we all have to untie the knots, and this is a really ongoing job. Shall we go to Maroussia's question, Vera, please? That we can all ask each other.
So Maroussia asked, how do you get away from the self-fulfilling prophecy of picking African photographers to show their work and vision of the continent, but yet still portray or do images for Western audiences?
Yeah, I thought it was super interesting, and I definitely didn't answer it at the time, and I'm mostly interested in your opinions of it. So let's start there. Maroussia, do you want to answer your own question, and then we'll discuss it?
I mean, I'm in no position to judge. Everyone does what they want, but I still have a massive problem now being in the market as to the realization that, I mean, that's what we were just talking about before. It's a continuation of that. But, you know, even now, even when more famous or emerging African photographers, documentary photographers, I'm talking specifically about documentary photography, it's still in a very westernized imagery, aesthetics, you know, even the, you know, all the reminiscence of Renaissance paintings, any languages that would, you know, appeal or, you know, be understood by, you know, the West. I'm not even talking about Asia or Latin America, because a lot of it still, you know, there's no cultural exchange in that sense, or no cultural reality. Right. And even though the image is brilliant and it's beautiful, it's still, you know, I'm still interested in what's hidden, not what's been shown and what wants to be seen, because what is being published is what is still comforting to the West. we're not showing, I mean, we're showing, you know, the World Press Photo. There was this Kabira stories, which are beautiful pictures of a ballet school in a slum. But yeah, okay, it's showing, oh, okay, they can have ballet there too. So it's still very degrading to me. I mean, you know, dance has been part of our culture and our tradition for since, you know, since the beginning of time. So, and I think that brings me on to what is the definition of documentary photography today? Because I find that a lot of work that other photographers are doing, such as Omar Victor Diop, I mean, Vera can put up the names of all of these, is actually this expression of documenting our lives, our histories, and what is actually going on in the continent, but in a much different way. So using the lens, but with other methods, it might be, you know, textile, it might be other pictures, it might be very different ways. And, you know, so that definition of documentary photography, I believe, needs to evolve to include, you know, how people feel that they can express themselves through that evolution. And documentary photography, I'm more and more seeing from my side, from my continent. And I think it's actually quite condescending to call it art and being an artist, because there's so much work and so much research which is actually put into it. That, yeah, I do sometimes find it condescending just because it doesn't fit that specific criteria of having to, you know, have that big image, that, you know, environmental image and so on. That's completely different, but we're a different, you know, every country is different. And for us, maybe it's not so much country, but ethnic background or so on, but we all have our culture, and that's what's important. So how do you convey that? How do we allow a space for that sort of documentary photography to emerge?
Right. I mean, I thought that, you mentioned Omar Victor Diop. I don't know if we can quickly put up a picture, but his body of work where they're self-portraits, and he puts basically himself, but all of the black men, I think it's all men, but yeah, who just been disappeared, but very specifically from history, but very specifically the history of European art, which is so hideously white. You know, for years, when I didn't start going to art galleries till I was about 22, but when I did, it was like, this is oppressive, and I'm a white person, so you know, that was to do with the male element of it mainly, but also this kind of complete lack of understanding. So I thought this work is, yes, super smart. Thanks, Vera, for showing us that. And super fabulous looking as well. And so, I mean, I'm not going to say which kind of definition, you know, what style of photography this is, but I was interested, we were all chatting about Ada Malunye earlier from Addis in Ethiopia. She runs the Addis Photo Festival, and she has a fabulous photographic practice of her own. And I was really interested to see, thanks again, Vera, on her website, that she has the heading of photojournalism, where her photography of Ethiopia is, I think, quite a lot in black and white, and perhaps is the kind of, you know, would you know that it was taken? I mean, there's definitely an intimacy that's beautiful, but would you necessarily know? Is it a Western gaze that she has kind of taken back? I mean, she's Ethiopian, so I'm just saying, has she ingested a Western gaze for this word photojournalism? And then if you contrast that with her exquisite work that she calls art on her website, which is the work that we featured in Firecracker, you know, I'd like to see this work kind of everywhere. And if art means that it only lives in an art gallery, then then I have a problem. I don't really mind what it's called, but I suppose one of my concerns is making imagery public, and there's different ways to do that. I mean, the collective Disturb uses photojournalistic images, but puts them on walls in cities, and it's like, I'd like to do something similar with what's an art image, and, you know, get this into a kind of public space, you know, in a way like Zoe Leonard did on the High Line, I want a Dyke for a president, that kind of thing. It's like, I wanted this work to, if it is in an art gallery, but it's really saying something vibrant about cultures, then I want it out there. Yeah, I mean, I also think, Adriana, I don't know what you think about this, but the idea of like having new eyes. Now, this is an idea that I actually got from reading James Agee, in his book with Walker Evans that I went on about quite a lot, probably when you did your MA, Letters Now Praise Famous Men. But it's all about this act of witnessing and whether it's ethical, etc., etc. He doesn't think it is ethical at all to kind of focus on these poor sharecroppers. But anyway, the point being that he says that you need new eyes, you need to build new audiences through the work that you make. And I feel like this is a moment that we're in. And Mark Seeley mentioned Rotimi Fani Kayode's work and how I think that was made, I'm sorry, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago. I actually don't know how long ago it was made. Maybe it was a bit longer than that. And he said that no one understood it at all, and that it's kind of having a resurgence now, which I found interesting. I mean, Adriana, in the type of work that you make and also look at, do you make definitions between photojournalism, documentary photography and art? And what do you think about the idea of creating new eyes and new audiences? Thanks, Vera.
Yeah, no, I think, no, it's super interesting. And there's so many blurred lines with that when we're talking about documentary photojournalism, art photography. I think I have gotten to a place where I kind of don't want to separate them anymore. And because like, right, when you're talking about art photography and you're talking about, does art photography mean that it goes in galleries, like all these things, I feel like in a lot of ways, I'm not interested in art that is on white walls and white frames for white people. Like, I'm not. So if that's the only thing that's art, then I mean, I don't know what the heck we're making, but it's making people feel. It's making people feel. It's making people react. It's making people learn, and it's making me learn. And I am constantly learning from the collaborators, and they're constantly learning from me. So I just feel like, yeah, the idea of art and separating it, I don't know, I can't anymore. Like, I can't separate it anymore. And also because, like, with the way that I use a camera and with the way that we're really cultivating a space for it in Homie House, I feel like people they have a really hard time. I mean, here in the US, I feel like they have a really hard time with like what I do. They're like, oh, you're an activist. And I'm like, I'm not. I'm an artist, but I care. And if being an artist that cares makes me an activist, then I guess I'm an activist, but I'm an artist. So it's like this very like weird thing of like, and right now I feel like there's so much performative stuff of everyone wants to be an activist. And it's like, I never put that on me ever. But I do make work with care and with tenderness, tons of tenderness. It's a word that I use a lot within my practice. So yeah, these differentiations of like, oh, then it's not photojournalism because you're a part of it, but it's not art because you're like scrappy and you do it for the people. It's not like, you're not even an artist, you're an activist. Where do I fit? Again, all the fronteras all the time. Like, I have no idea. But I just like, I don't know, at this point, it's like, we make books, it's fun, yeah.
I mean, I've got about at least six questions that I definitely thought we'd get to, but because it's coming up to 8, and I don't know if there are questions from other humans in this space that we're sharing, but I just want to, I don't really want to ask you quickly, but I certainly want to ask you both about self-care, which I think is being talked about maybe more than it used to be. We ended one of our visible justice sessions after people had talked about, you know, really hardcore subjects and how obviously we take this into our bodies, you know, all of us. And I wondered how, you know, Maroussia, it must have been very painful to work with the subject of infanticide and speak with women who'd had those experiences. Yeah, I wonder how you practice self-care.
I think a lot of the self-care comes through the photography itself. I think,
right,
for me, it's a very philosophical, even almost meditative space. So, and I think also to know that I'm trying to do something that might help other women. You know, even if it's just one person, I think that's the way that I go through with it. I mean, I've seen so much violence. I've seen people lynched. And I think my way of is it's just not keeping it in. It's actually, you know, trying to do something whatever way that you can about it. But self-care is so important. I mean, you can't lose yourself. Some topics are so difficult and can, you know, eat you up, or even I mean, for me, what was I think I didn't want to go into the gory details about, you know, going to the, I mean, I went to the morgues and so on, but I was trying to cut myself off from that. I was trying to focus more on, you know, what were the causes and how I can help those women, because it's society that is the problem, and so sort of focus on that. But self-care, I mean, you know, taking time for yourself to really, you know, digest all of it is really important. Especially because I think I'm crossing the line, also becoming very close in trying to bring this question forward. So I'm trying to find my own visual language, which encompasses so many other things. But so I have to just be careful and go slowly with it. But yeah, self-care, definitely, whether you're a photographer or not.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that thing, I suppose, about the, you know, the things that you see, you can't kind of unsee things. I mean, Adriana, you don't focus your work on you know, actual subjects of violence, but for example, your latest, am I right in saying that your latest zine is for and with black trans women?
Yeah,
Who else have been very much the subject of violence? Sorry, just to finish my own sentence. Yeah. Is that, am I right?
yes, Max. The latest small zine that we put out, it's Even the Score, the Revolution, and it's a special edition that we put out for the uprisings that started in May, and it's a project that I did with me and my besties, but we made it specifically for and me and my besties is Black and brown femmes, but we made it specifically for Black trans femmes. And I basically wanted to bring them all together because using like they all have these jobs that are very useful for self-care and for healing, and I felt like if this is something, like I think we can put a bunch of resources together that can be used for the revolution and focusing on self-care, since there is so much stuff that is happening that we do need to do the work and it is all necessary, but in bringing my sister into it, who is a therapist. She made a resource list of therapy that's mindful, and like all kinds of people within the US that could, like, these are ways, these are links, these are things for everyone in every state. Like you can find some sort of therapy, and probably free therapy here. With one of my besties, Jael, she's a psychologist at a university, and she wrote a whole, like, why healing is important and how it looks in the Black body. And I was like, that's it, like that's the manifesto, that's it. And my friend that works more in like she's more of an artist, she works more with her hands, with drawing, with illustrations, with sewing. We asked her to do like an illustration that basically represent us, like show us what we look like as Black and brown femmes, and like let's talk about it in space of healing. So putting that all together ended up being like a really beautiful resource for another side of the revolution that is so often ignored. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you. And Maroussia, with the women that you work with in Senegal, what were you able to also, it sounded like you were, to bring them together as a community, as opposed to a series of outcasts people?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them, actually, there's a NGO that works on former female prisoners, so reform. So I was able to basically, I mean, infanticide being, they a lot of them know each other from the time in prisons, and I was thinking that, you know, because speaking to them individually, they have no means, I mean, they have no psychological support whatsoever. They all suffer from PTSD. And I was thinking, in Europe we have AA, NA, CA, and having, you know, a space of anonymity, but also a space to discuss all of these things. So we're setting up these groups. Obviously there's travel, there's a lot of around, I think, yeah, discussing is very important, and discussion is, you know, I can't remember what your question was initially, Max, but yeah, I think
Community.
definitely, yeah, yeah, community, yeah, definitely, and bring that. I mean, essential. This is actually the work with the community. It's not these women. Is actually, I mean, and the people that have mostly, I mean, those women shared their stories, and I thank them for being so honest. I mean, about their acts, which is so tragic, but I to a lot of other people, and I remember the president of the Wasteland said to me that at first, you know, he was against abortion, he was against contraception, he was against all of these things, but all of those dead bodies. Oh no, now we really do need to have a discussion as a country about this, and I think it's about starting at community levels within the families, of having mediation. I've attended quite a few mediation sessions, you know, and it's going to be ground level. You know, we have to invert the pyramid. It's always going up, and that's why I was saying also that it's really important for me. You know, I realize that so much of the resources from international institutions I won't name, working on trying to get access to abortion in Senegal, but that's not the problem. So, I mean, unless you're actually trying to really solve the problem, and that's a big problem around the world, is, you know, not just aid, but if you want to, you know, cut the root cause of the problem, then you need to go into those communities and mediate and it does create, you know, wider communities. And, you know, in doing this in Senegal, I'm now going to Niger for other things and so on. So, you know, you find it a lot that it's a big, you know, something much wider. So I think community is definitely important and essential, actually.
Thank you. Vera, what do we have time to do? Are there any questions?
No, but we have a very nice comment by Ross Nichols. Not a question, just a heartfelt thanks for such a powerful and thought-provoking session today. So important that you spoke a little to the issue of wellness and self-care. I hope this message finds you all safe and well.
Thank you.
That's nice. Hello, Ross. Thank you. That's really nice to hear that. I mean,
Oh, Coco said thank you.
Oh, that's so lovely. Thank you. Do you guys want to say anything else, or should we wrap up 7 minutes late?
I'm okay with wrapping up.
Is it that we didn't talk about? I was wondering if yeah, no, I was wondering lots and lots and lots of things, but you've shared no, you've really and we were today talking. What would be, okay, final question. It's like a quiz show, right? Final question. If you could do one thing in the arena of either photojournalism, art, or education, or all of those things, if that's preferable to you, to make a productive change in terms of how, in terms of representation of your people, whoever people are, what would it be? And it doesn't have to be something that you do. It could be something that everyone does.
I think it would go through collaboration. I mean, I've got my eye, but, you know, there's sound, there's so many. I mean, I really think that photography is powerful in itself, but something that can encompass and bring out all of the senses and bring out all of the emotions that we have within ourselves is something that would be much greater. And one of my things I'm working on more just briefly is on the Senegalese Tayos, which were the World War II fighters. And I thought that, you know, collecting their narratives and their history and taking their portraits was fine, but it wasn't near enough in terms of actually talking about representation and rewriting and ownership of your own history. And that needed to go through so many different voices. So I included so many different artists. I've got, you know, people doing sculptures, painters, poets, dancers, singers, and I think it's just able, you know, I think that's the best way to bring it forward. It's not something that I think, you know, maybe I can do that in things, but I certainly think that collaboration is a way forward. And I think it's diversity of opinion, visions, which can only bring any debate forward. Yeah, so one word, collaboration, probably.
Thank you, Maroussia. Adriana?
I think for me, the the most powerful way that we can use all these things comes together with education. I feel like we're in such need of like revisionist history worldwide.
Right.
And if we can get these zines, these DIY like projects that people are making from their own stories, if we can get that into curriculum, if we can get that into like elementary schools, if we can get that into like spaces of learning, which to me are the last utopia in a lot of ways. Like that's it. Like it's all about education. And like I feel like the generation after me, the Zoomers, are like, I feel like they're so good at education. Like I feel like the way that they educate each other, like how like you can get a whole curriculum from a hashtag. Like it's so exciting. Like I learned so much from just clicking a hashtag. Like I mean, there's so much. It's everything. And I really feel like I can't do art anymore without it. Like it's very much like connected for me. And everything that I do, I want it to be something where we're like bringing something back to a community, where it's like being like, this is what we're doing for us to move forward and like rewrite the wrongs and like rewrite and maybe like a little bit clearer and a little bit more honest our stories.
Amazing. Yeah, and for me, you guys are the change I want photography to have. So thank you so much for sharing so much, and making this the conversation that it's been, and one that I know will continue between us and between everyone that's been here in the room sharing the space with us. So thank you all so much. Thanks, Vera, for hosting.
Thank you so much. This has been so lovely. Thanks for a chance to get to do this with you.
I'm sure you want to come for a third time, Max. Never managed to get through the question.
Yeah, I mean, we must carry on these conversations. It's so important. We all must carry on these conversations and these actions, and take care of ourselves.
Indeed. Thank you all, ladies. It's so amazing to have just a female panel, actually. I need to do that now. And Adriana, I loved hearing you talking about your work and everything that you do with so much passion and enthusiasm, and just open to so many things. I think that's really the way forward. You say, just moving forward and just growing, and it's been wonderful. So thank you for sharing all. Very much. As always, pleasure to see you, and we want to stay for a while.
Thank you so much.
You might have to do a debrief with me, just because I want to talk to you.
Yeah,
absolutely. More to say. Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for joining, and enjoy the rest of your evening. That isn't cheesy at all. And enjoy the rest of your evening, and stay safe. Take care.
And all LCCM as well, your little comments, past years and current years. Thank you so much, guys, for supporting us and being here. And
I didn't catch that. Sorry.
A shout out to the LCC alumni,
MHJD community,
to LCC
alumni, and
here, absolutely, and Westminster. Amazing that you all came. Thank you so much. I can see some of the participants. Really. Thank you. Should we sign off?
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.